Today, I wanted to talk about the Little Rascals and kind of rethinking what that show is really about. You could call it a fan theory, I guess, but at the same time, it's a peek into early Hollywood and the use of orphans in the early entertainment industry. Now, whether they were orphans in real life is hard to tell, but it seems quite evident that some of the most popular movies in the golden era of Hollywood revolve around orphans. Take Dorothy, for example, from The Wizard of Oz. There's something about this symbolism that is used consistently throughout the dawn of early film. I thought it would be interesting to consider that in connection with resets and repopulation. Why were there so many movies about orphans in the first 30 years of Hollywood? Well, one of the most famous shows ever is The Little Rascals. Now, if you're like me from the new generation, I didn't really watch this growing up at all. I only know about it because there was a movie made in 1994, and I did watch this growing up as I'd go to my friend's house and this was the only movie that he was allowed to watch. This and Sandlot, actually. So I didn't really see any of the older shows growing up, and I'm definitely not an expert. I'm just researching the past of this whole entire concept, trying to view it from an outside perspective, and it led me down this interesting rabbit hole, or theory, I guess you could say. Perhaps there are things missing, but I would love an expert who knows everything about it to explain a few things because there's some really weird stuff going on in these old shows. So, The Little Rascals is actually based on a film series called Our Gang, and it wasn't called Little Rascals from what I could tell, it was called Hal Roach's Rascals, which were a series of comedy short films chronicling a group of poor neighborhood children and their adventures, starting in 1922, and the production continued until 1944. Okay, so let's remember that. They're described as poor children. You see, from what I remember, it was just a group of kids who were just being kids. But it seems there are some details left out on the overall summaries of the show. That's what made this investigation difficult, is that there are many older episodes, which I've seen all the talkies and almost all of the silent films that are online, and I can't really find anything that is detailed on the lore behind all of this. Like, who are these kids, and why are they involved in all these weird scenarios, even secret societies? So let me ask you, are the Little Rascals orphans? If so, that would certainly put a huge spin on the entire show. Okay, so why are we talking about the Little Rascals? The Little Rascals is not just a show about poor children. First off, it's basically like the first show in Hollywood. We're talking about the early 1920s is when this all started, especially a show of its kind showing children of multiple races together going on adventures. It was huge, but it's mostly seen from a comedic view. That when watching the show, we're seeing the world from the point of view of the children. But what if there's something else going on? Something darker that doesn't get enough light, or at least I haven't seen anything explaining what this show is really about. Well, let's begin. Because remember, this show has some of the most iconic characters in Hollywood history. Alfalfa, Spanky, Darla, Froggy. Many of the bits are very well known. But this theory really brings into question everything about what this show is really about. So you're probably like, okay then, what is it about? What's so weird about the show? Okay, let's get started. I want you to see the Little Rascals from a whole new point of view, a new reality. The idea is that these little rascals are actually street orphans. They are orphans who constantly get in trouble and get moved home from home, and that's why they're little rascals. You little rascals! They can't seem to stay in one place. Not only that, but these street orphans are initiated in a secret society and have secret rituals. I know that sounds crazy, but hang with me. That's essentially what each episode is about, or at least originally. Now keep in mind that as the show progressed into the later seasons, they begin to have families for a longer period of time, but in the beginning of the Our Gang series, there is no question. This is a street gang of orphans or children who do not have birth parents or parents at all. This isn't a joke either, it's about to get super weird, and I couldn't even make this up if I wanted to. It's literally in the show. You will see it clearly if we go through some of the most bizarre episodes. It will become clear that there's something not quite right about this whole show. Well, first off, let's lay down some ground rules. the idea is that they're street orphans and they get moved around to different locations throughout the series. Okay, so once you're an orphan, you're always an orphan. It doesn't matter if the kid later in the series says, Mom, the child was once an orphan, and so is still considered a part of the street gang. Also, the dog symbolizes everything I just said. It means a street orphan that is a part of the club. Sounds pretty wild, huh? This is also interesting because there are some connections to this show in the Cabbage Patches. We'll discuss that later. But if we can find clues that connect orphans to Cabbage Patches, then perhaps this suggests that they are related to one another. Not just that, but what is the connection between secret societies, mind control, and orphans? So keep in mind that there are a lot of episodes, many to consider, so I'll do my best to present, but it's an extremely difficult task. It may be best to start with just refreshing on probably what everyone is familiar with, or if you've seen the newest movie. Okay, so the main character, for me at least, is Spanky, who is the leader of the crew and the best character in my opinion. Then you have Alfalfa, which I'm sure all of you have heard of or seen at some point in time with his famous cowlick. A few more important characters are Froggy, Stymie, Buckwheat, and Porky. Then you have the bully Butch. That's pretty much all we need to know for now, and as we go back to the original silent film era, we can discuss some more characters because the crew kind of changes over the years as they got older. Okay, so let's talk about the 1994 movie for a second. So for me, the acting isn't even close to as good as the original characters from the older show. And think about it, the whole movie is about how this gang doesn't explicitly say orphans, but I do suspect they are even orphans in this newer movie, where the creators are aware that they are street urchins, as look at the outfits of the children in the club other than Spanky and Alfalfa. Not just that, was in the trash can, and Waldo, the rich character, is apparently the best son money can buy, and we get a clip of Donald Trump, who plays his father strangely. So, Waldo is an orphan. We will see that supported by older episodes later. But yeah, they don't really go into detail in the movie on these kids' living situations or their past. The plot of the movie all revolves around these kids who are in a secret society named the He-Man Woman Haters Club. Now, I think most people will just say this is a cute kids club or something, but when we start to look into the older episodes on this, it's gonna get weird pretty quick. So, no, I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. This is a secret society with secret signs, directly correlated with Masonry. That's evident even in the 1994 film, complete with the dog with the black circle. That's something we'll explore later. But the proof of that is when the boys are walking into the club, they have to give a high sign, which is the very exact sign that is referenced in an older episode. So the creators definitely watched the old show and saw the symbolism as multiple bits are referenced throughout the 1994 movie. Well, again, the whole movie revolves around this secret society. Alfalfa breaks his oath and starts to like girls. And at first, he's actually sentenced to be executed by Spanky before Stymie gets involved. After this, Alfalfa even has a Shakespearean dream allegory where he falls off a cliff and he has to choose between the club or death. He falls into the ocean and then wakes up. Yeah, this movie is actually kind of explicit with some of the jokes, or let's just say more on the nose with it. His cowlick is referenced as something that springs when he gets excited, which is not as apparent in the original series, maybe for one episode, but just some weird references throughout the movie. But overall, yeah, the movie's not that bad when it comes to symbolism, but it does revolve around the notion of a kid in a secret society trying to win a girl back while the club sabotages him for breaking oath. There's also some cross dressing, which, sure, we can overlook, but it gets strange as we continue. That's the basic gist of the movie, nothing too dark about it, but it's only when you look into the past of the show that we can get the full picture. It even ends with a secret society including girls, as times are changing, which is exactly what happened in history with the Eastern Stars. Okay, so that's the 1994 movie. No mention of orphans, really, and if you search Little Rascals and orphans or secret societies, there's really nothing on this topic. We'll start with the talkies, and before we break down the lore of the Our Gang series, let's just go ahead and start breaking down some of the episodes from the iconic period, which I would say is from 1935 to the early 1940s, before the war, or really the episodes with Alfalfa in it. That way, it will make more sense when we start breaking down some of the mind blowing episodes. I guess I should mention that many of the older episodes from this time are considered racist, and apparently many of them have been edited, so it can be difficult to figure out what is really the original. But yeah, there are many themes and jokes that could be considered racist. There are many blackface scenes, so I do just want to give a warning just in case that offends anybody. There are some scenes where they make obvious black jokes, some worse than others. I'll bring it up when we come across those. Okay, well, let's start with Alfalfa in his first episode. Well, Alfalfa was played by Carl Alfalfa Switzer, who has a very strange story. Well, he died at the age of 31 before his 32nd birthday, in a very sad story where supposedly he pulled out a pocket knife and got shot. It was considered self defense, but he was shot by his former business partner, and this all occurred over $50. It's also on his gravestone that he was a Freemason, interestingly, because there's really not that much information on that. Well, in his first episode, Beginner's Luck, we basically get this weird stage show, which this is a common theme in this series, is you have these essentially mind-controlled children performing stage shows. Sure, you could argue that's extreme, but when you see them performing these songs and dancing to these different stories, I mean, what else do you want to call it? It's not like they want to do this stuff, they've been told what to memorize. It's called vaudeville theater, but when you see children do it, it's just strange, especially if there's a connection with orphans, which we'll see later. It's weird because they're like these little prodigies. And that's what I was saying with the new movie is that the children actors don't even compare to the talent from the original actors. Vaudeville was a theatrical genre of variety entertainment, which was a collection of different acts strung together. There are multiple Little Rascal Follies of episodes that basically revolve around this. Children prodigies performing strange symbolic shows for the sake of entertainment. And this was huge back in the day. They would do this at theaters as a show, or in other words, for money. There's nothing too strange about this episode, but there was this weird thing that I noticed. The girls in one of the play's performances actually sing a very specific song. It's called Honolulu Baby. Well, this song was actually written by Marvin Hatley for the 1933 Laurel and Hardy film Sons of the Desert. Which, look, I don't want to go into a whole different tangent here, but that film is weird. It's basically a comedy movie about secret societies, kind of making a joke of the whole matter while revealing certain things blatantly, such as ancient rites and oaths that must be abided by no matter what. Anyways, in that movie, it's a movie about Shriners, and also, by the way, it was produced by Hal Roach, the mind behind Little Rascals. Well, in Sons of the Desert, they sing this Honolulu song in the exact same fashion. I only noticed this because I watched the movie randomly and that song got stuck in my head, so there's some weird connection or nod going on there, and that song's not a famous song. It was made just for that movie. To understand this, Hal Roach was a huge figure in early Hollywood and is essentially the creator of the Little Rascals or Our Gang show. They are Hal Roach's Rascals. Well, he would eventually team up with Harold Lloyd, someone who used to be extremely famous but not too many people know about him anymore. You've probably seen the scene of him hanging from the clock tower. Well, yeah, this guy was a master 33rd degree Freemason and was one of Hal Roach's partners. He's actually in the episode of Our Gang, in fact, so right there, there's no denying that Freemasonry was somewhat a part of this whole ordeal. Lloyd has some weird movies himself that we could break down where he tries to commit suicide and is brought to heaven to self reflect. It's kind of like putting rituals in secret in early film. There's even blood in that scene, a cross or an X on some books in the background, and he even checks a dictionary for the word sepulcher as he's writing his death letter. So, yeah, very strange, some Masonic allegory. Anyways, I digress. That's the background behind some of the creators of the show. So it's logical to conclude that references of secret societies are not just reaching or overanalyzing. When we see this viewpoint of the children, their world, and the clubs that they were in, well, these are actually references to the clubs that the adults are in during that time, which If you were anyone big back in the day, you'd be associated with this secret society or fraternity of some kind. To me, that is definitely what they're doing with the He-Man Woman Haters Club bit. Actually, the He-Man Woman Haters Club is not the only club. There are more. The first episode for the He-Man Woman Haters Club is from Hearts or Thumbs, and then Male and Female. But this isn't the first club. This is just kind of a joke that evolved from older bits. But weirdly, they still take oaths, and they also have a checkerboard table for the Judge Spanky in the He-Man Woman Haters Club. In the episode Male and Female, there's also a cross-dressing bit, and the other boys end up liking Alfalfa once he dresses up, which is kind of weird to me. Also, what's the consequence of breaking the He-Man Woman Haters Club's oath? You get paddled. It's important to remember for later, as it's a pretty blatant reference. Search for Freemason paddle if you want to see what I mean. There's also the Wise Owl Club, so a Minerva reference. This is in the Fishy Tales episode, which this is just a bizarre episode. Some kind of play on William Tell, which is an old legend of an assassin. And Buckwheat kind of takes a joke for a moment, and then while looking in the mirror, Alfalfa accidentally shoots Butch in the back of the head. So Alfalfa is scared and they think Butch is going to beat him up, so they have to pretend that his foot has been dislocated. And they're in this Wise Owl Club room, which also the sign says sees all, says nothing, so secret stuff. Then inside, there's a clear square and compass on the wall. They make a fake foot so that it could trick Butch, but it's strange because he's just hammering this leg, and then Alfalfa's leg is secretly under the bed getting tickled, and eventually gets bit by crabs. Which doesn't seem by accident. Why were there crabs under the bed? Perhaps it was for the street cats that enter later, but why are they responsible for feeding the cats? And why is there a bed in here? What kids do you know that go out and build a secret lodge with a bed? It's kind of weird if you ask me. There is the Eagle Eye Detective Agency that features an eye on the door, and now Alfalfa has a secret name. He is X10. This is in the Hide and Shriek episode, but they're just pretending to be detectives. Okay, so then what's up with all this oath stuff? Why do they need to take oaths? Porky and Buckwheat both get the name X6, so 66. Well, in this episode, they accidentally get kidnapped. It wasn't on purpose, they randomly just hop in a crate, and this was on the back of a truck. But yeah, then they get taken to this haunted house, a grand opening, with some strange skull and bone symbols. Sure, a skull on its own is not that bad, but in this context, it is symbolic. So these kids basically wake up in the dark or inside of this haunted house, and once they come out of the crate, they don't know that this is a haunted house. So for them, this is a real experience. And keep in mind, the kids are still wearing their hats, which is weird and obviously has some type of meaning. Well, a voice comes on and tells them that few make it out of this place alive. On the surface level, this is just a haunted house where the kids accidentally found themselves after deciding to be detectives. But on an esoteric level, this is some type of initiation ritual. They have to choose which door to go through, and if they choose the wrong one, they die. Interestingly, as they try to escape, there's a door that has a demon monster inside, and I want you to remember how this looks for later, as it's directly connected to an older episode. This is no accident. That is some type of demonic being with horns and smoke coming outside of its mouth. Notice the curtains. This is a behind-the-scenes look. Remember the eye from the beginning of the episode? So they start running, but it's one of those moving walkways, so they can't get away from this demon. Alfalfa's like, I can't run anymore, and just falls, and for him, he thinks he's going to die. But he wakes up on the other side, realizing that they had to face their fears. Then, if they want to escape, they need to sit on a bench, which here we realize that the voice is actually Lucifer or the devil. They didn't want to sit on the bench, so a skeleton with the head of the devil and a pitchfork comes out, and Alfalfa's like, okay, we'll do what you say. You may think, okay, well, it's just a ride. And I get that, but I don't know of any rides that have crossbones like this, and they also have a buzzsaw ready to chop off your head. That seems a little dangerous if you ask me. So they run out of this haunted house and they're terrified, and they never want to be detectives again. Then you have the All for One, One for All club, which has nothing to do with hating girls. It's exclusive to only the guys, and this is the club where they got the secret signs from in the 1994 movie. This All for One club is in the Alfalfa's Aunt episode, which is a very strange Alfalfa episode. It starts with the boys having a club meeting, and we see the same hand pointing icon from the previous Hide and Shriek episode, which in this one is pointing to the secret entrance. And then a goat comes running out just in case you didn't get what was going on here. Well, they have Phrygian caps or some type of hatware for this club, and they also have dues or yearly payments to be able to be a part of the club. They have a high sign of brotherhood, and then they do this sign from the movie here as well. Next, we're introduced to a new character that has never been in previous shorts, Alfalfa's aunt Penelope, who decides to become a murder mystery author. This is weird because for some reason she decides to use the actual last name of the family. So what ends up happening is she drops a page from her novel, and it literally says that she has to kill her nephew, Alfalfa, because it's the only thing between her and the Switzer millions. I get that she was just using names for inspiration, but come on, what kind of person would write about this? Especially writing about killing your nephew in agony at a specific astrological timing? So Alfalfa reads this and gets really scared. What does he do? Well, he goes to his brothers in the club and asks for help because they are all for one. It's really weird because if you watch the series in order, this episode was much different, like with out of nowhere changes. But yeah, so Alfalfa reads this note. Dear X, I have discovered that only my nephew stands between me and the Switzer millions. So like the others, he shall die in agony. Tonight at the stroke of 9. Penelope is reading a book called Famous Murders with a strange M character and also a blade with 3 drops of blood that looks pretty occult. The newspaper that Alfalfa is holding is also filled with some type of death or murder scene. Porky then literally sniffs smelling salts in this episode, and so they swap Alfalfa's body with some fake one to scare Aunt Penelope, and she decides to leave. But they never really explain why she used their names in the first place. This All for One club is actually the successor club to the Eagles Club, which was in the Pinch Singer episode. This is a lesser known episode that wasn't distributed by MGM, and it kind of makes sense when you watch it. Alfalfa is in blackface in this one. It was actually kind of harder to find. I only found it in an archive, but also towards the end, there is this plantation trio with multiple kids in blackface. This is what I was talking about earlier with the stage shows. Well, the Eagle Club was a secret club that was trying to raise money so that they could enter a radio contest show. This will be a common theme. Orphans trying to raise money by performing these very weird acts that on the surface can be seen as cute, but when you really think about it, it's more for adults, not children, as they have no idea what any of this means. The Eagle Club is the successor club to the ancient and honorary order of woodchucks, when its president was actually Stymie, not Spanky. This is one of the earlier clubs with the high sign, which involved the fingers of one hand in front of one's chin. They gather in a ramshackle old shed identified by a hand-painted sign on the door giving the club's full name as the Ancient and Honorary Order of Woodchucks Club Incorporated. This club also has dues, and there are some different crew members, so what's going on here? This is not just some cute club that the kids made up. It goes back multiple generations with multiple different Little Rascal characters. So this is a passed on tradition. But how? That would only make sense if they were actually orphans. We also see the dog on a pedestal or at the front near the president. This meaning will be explored further. This is from Anniversary Trouble, another episode that's difficult to find as it wasn't distributed by MGM. We will talk more about Spanky, but in this episode, Spanky has a family with the black maid and Buckwheat, so Buckwheat's basically a maid in this episode. But it gets worse because, well, I'm pretty sure Buckwheat plays a girl in these early episodes, and 2, Spanky does blackface in this episode. So it's kind of cross-dressing and racist, but the kids don't even know the difference at first, which is also pretty weird. Then the episode ends with some spanking, and Spanky is spanking his pop. Spanky may be a play on that he's getting constantly in trouble or he's a little rascal, so he gets spankings. but he does most of the spanking, being a leader of the club. There are actually a few more clubs, but before we get to that, let's discuss some of the weirdness from the Alfalfa episodes. There are the black jokes that come every other episode. For example, Divot Diggers has buckwheat being dragged by a dog, and they make this monkey joke multiple times throughout different episodes. It's kind of like with the Lucky Corner episode where buckwheat will be the butt of the joke. Arbor Day was kind of a weird one. They have this bit that they do a lot where midgets from a sideshow will be pretending to be children, but they're full grown adults. I'll talk about that later. The Russian ballet is the classic cross dressing episode where they run from the bullies and do a performance, but there are also men with masks, which is kind of strange. And in the background is this Greek architecture with the pillars and a classic checkerboard floor. In Three Smart Boys, they pretend to have an epidemic. They go to the doctor and think that the doctor actually gave buckwheat a serum and turned him into a monkey. So, another monkey joke. Then you have The Follies of 1938. This is a really good short where Alfalfa peers into the future. There is a Barber of Seville reference, and in the future, Spanky owns a club and has a top hat. In Framing Youth, Spanky looks over at a picture of him with a black eye that is very eerie, and in this episode, it has to do with the radio again. We hear the same Honolulu baby song from Sons of the Desert. This episode is basically about them converting their club into a voice studio so that Alfalfa can win a radio talent show. In Aladdin's Lantern, it's just some weird stage shows again with cross dressing and perhaps even a Masonic stage. Well, let's continue because now we can explore one of the main themes of the show. This idea that you can replace children and trade them in for a newer model. Which, once you see the show for what it is, this is exactly what's happening to the children. But in the short, Tiny Troubles, we get this very weird episode. Okay, so it starts with the kids in jail, and we learn about a light fingered Lester, which is one of those midgets I was talking about. Well, he pretends to be a baby, and this is literally the movie Little Man. Not sure if you've ever seen that, but yeah, that's a wild movie. Anyways, Alfalfa couldn't get his baby brother to stop crying, which, by the way, was twins in Roman Holiday, so I suspect this is a new family entirely. But forgetting that for now. He decides that he has had enough with this baby, and so he literally decides to trade him in for a new model. This is because Darla compares the baby to a puppy and is like, "We once traded the puppy in, perhaps you can do the same for the baby." That's not a normal thing for kids to say. And at some point, regardless of social norms, they would have some idea where babies come from. Maybe not in detail, but I don't think it makes sense for these kids to be so clueless. Well, apparently, Alfalfa was told that his mom got his brother from a hollow tree in the park. And they actually believe this to be true, so they're like, okay, let's go to the tree and get a new baby. Forget this one. They even put a note on the baby, strangely. So they go there, and light-fingered Lester is hiding from the police in the tree, and the crew shows up and thinks he's an actual infant. They're like, hey, there's a baby there now. And so they drop off Alfalfa's baby brother and actually leave him in the park alone while they take this new baby, which is actually a midget. Yeah, such a weird episode. He goes to Alfalfa's home, drinks beer, and smokes a cigar until the cops show up and takes everybody in. To me, the strangest part is that there would even be an episode about bringing a child in. Remember, the comparison was to a puppy, so like a dog, to get a better or more quieter version. What are they trying to say? Is it just a fun little bit? Or is there more to this symbolism? Well, we aren't done yet, and if you're skeptical, hang on for a moment, as there's some episodes that we'll discuss later that will show there's more to this all than just humor and funny gags. For example, the very next episode is called Dual Personalities, where a certain secret is revealed. The whole episode is about hypnotism, and the joke is that hypnotism is actually real. That's essentially the bit in this one. First, we see a man who was hypnotized to become a bridge, but then seemingly by chance, Alfalfa is chosen from a crowd to get hypnotized because he mistakes the word skeptical to mean timid. He then becomes a Three Musketeer or something. But the interesting part about this is that the hypnotist gets hit in the head by a brick that fell from a brick mason. And because this Mason dropped a brick and hit the hypnotist, Alfalfa's now stuck in a trance state temporarily, where he truly believes to be a musketeer. You may be like, okay, so what? It's just a joke on hypnotism, not so bad. But you have to think about what we're talking about here: orphans, children in early Hollywood. And at this time, the Labor Standards Act of 1938 was just enacted, so you think there were any laws against hypnotism? Of course, you can say it's not real, but they're telling you in this episode that it's real. And if it were possible, wouldn't that put a spin on this whole series? Perhaps it explains why these children were young prodigies. Then this episode involves a sword duel to the death with Butch and Alfalfa. Darla's even like, oh, they might kill each other over this. They literally even have a grave ready for the kids. Is this some type of weird ritual or something? Then they shoot each other with fake guns, but Darla ends up picking Waldo instead. The next episode is another common theme that's been done multiple times throughout the history of the series. Gang discovers that Porky's family can't pay rent, and there's this goat randomly, which we'll actually see in many episodes, especially the earlier ones. But yeah, so they put on this circus show to raise money, and they have like all these fake animals that aren't even real animals. There's an older short from the silent film era that has the exact concept where they're going through a strange mansion and you have all these bootleg animals. Interestingly, in this episode, Buckwheat plays the tribal Borneo man or the man eater, but we'll discuss that more in a bit. You could even perhaps consider the end of this episode a hanged man reference, as Alfalfa is a daredevil and gets stuck on this rope swing that they attach to a donkey. Also, there's this Mr. Wilson, who is the guy at the beginning of the episode demanding for rent. This is an important character to remember for later, but later in this short, he goes to get some lemonade, but is unaware that the reason there's a discount is because the goat named Violet drank from it. And so he spits the drink out, throwing the rest of the drink on the goat's face, and then the goat kicks him. Now, this Mr. Wilson is the same character from a previous episode where he owns an orphanage. This is the same actor, Clarence Wilson, who was in the episode Shrimps for a Day. So he's the leading staff or head at the Happy Home Orphanage, which we'll discuss shortly. It may be important to note that Spanky and Porky were brothers earlier in the series, but are not brothers in this episode. They say it's because the writers forgot, but I disagree. I believe it was done on purpose once you see the secret of the show. Okay, let's move on to Cousin Wilbur, another episode with the All for One Club. Wilbur is getting initiated. His last name is Newcomb William Nesbitt. He calls Porky and Buckwheat by master, strangely, so Wilbur's like, where are all the members at? What do you offer? And Alfalfa's like, well, we have secret signs. And then Wilbur's like, oh, you're a social club. You should think about becoming a benevolent society, which is a society that offers insurance with its membership. Weirdly, the benefits of the society is that they pay you if you get harmed or get a black eye or bee stings or even a spanking by your mother or father. Sure, kids get black eyes, but it just seems strange that this would even be associated with a society, especially one with secret high signs. Well, what happens is supposedly Butch starts giving all the kids black eyes, and now they have to pay for all this. So basically, this whole episode is about Freemasonry, black eyes, and insurance played out on a kid level. There's another episode, Dad for a Day, where they're in the gang clubhouse and Mickey doesn't have a dad. It's actually a sweet episode with a nice ending, but it's strange because they end up going to a maternity ward, and then there's these guys just waiting to receive their babies, and one guy's even randomly told he has triplets. Nothing too strange about this episode, but it becomes questionable once you follow Mickey throughout the series. Mickey is also an orphan, and we'll see that as we continue. Then there's the All About Hash episode, where we learn about the All for One acting company. So wait, does this mean there are secret societies associated with acting companies? In the New Pupil episode, Froggy's reciting some stuff about the War of 1812, which is not that big of a deal, but I thought it'd be interesting to note because there are several war reenactments within the series. Bubbling Troubles is a weird episode where Alfalfa's going to like explode or something. But let's go ahead and move on to Alfalfa's last episode. It's called Kitty Cure. And the weirdest thing about this is that we're never really told it's Alfalfa's last episode. He just doesn't show up in any more shorts after this one. So, what's it about? Well, the episode starts with Alfalfa in a stroller, and now he has twin brothers. This isn't just a mistake from the writers because the physician is literally like, "Oh, how are those twins I brought you?" So, these twins were given away? You don't think so? Well, Alfalfa says, "Look, if mom orders any more babies, please, only one at a time." Oh, so they are ordering children. It revolves around this William Morton, which apparently he is sick, but this doctor doesn't really think he's sick. He's just lonely and needs children. Weirdly, it seems the Morton guy wants a stronger dose, so he wants some more drugs for sure. Just in case you didn't catch the symbolism from the beginning of the episode, they make it more clear for you. As the kids are playing baseball in a sandlot out back, they hit a baseball through the window, knocking over Mr. Morton's medicine. So Morton leaves his room to hear the doctor talking to his wife, and he literally says, "Have you ever considered adopting a child or two?" Well, Morton doesn't like this idea, but the door rings and the crew has showed up to apologize for the window. It's in this shot that we see the floor is clearly a checkerboard pattern, which to me is relevant. And this is where it gets weird. So basically, the wife is like, "No, don't worry, you guys, you don't need to do anything." But Morton wants to invite the children over for dinner. The reason is because his wife is going out to adopt children. The wife was going to do this as a surprise, as she doesn't know that Mr. Morton overheard the conversation between her and the physician. So the plan is Mr. Morton does not want children. So he's trying to trick his wife by making her see that the children are chaotic, so she won't adopt any children. How is he going to do this? Well, he basically goes insane and starts ripping the entire place apart, trying to destroy his home so that he can blame it on the gang. This way, his wife will decide not to adopt children and he can continue on his prescription. I really don't get this at all because when the wife returns, regardless if the place is a mess, if she changes her mind, she's gonna have to bring the kids she just adopted back. So I don't know, this episode's a little messed up once you break it down. Well, the kids think this guy's a lunatic, and at some point he hears Froggy's voice and tries to give him some medicine, but the gang thinks he's trying to poison Froggy, so they tell him not to drink it. The kids are scared for their lives, so they run around this mansion, and we get this little Scooby Doo bit with the running chase loop through multiple doorways. So apparently, Alfalfa's twin brothers are just snacking on this guy's strongest dose of pills, which pretty sure that would not be good for them at all. This is a life or death scenario. But wait, the twist is, the doctor was just giving him placebo pills because Mr. Morton isn't really sick. He just needs a child in his life. So this whole episode is about trying to convince this wealthy older couple that they just need to adopt children so that Mr. Morton will be happy. Hence the name of the episode, Kitty Cure. This is Alfalfa's last episode, but let's think about this for a moment. Okay, so Alfalfa, which, by the way, what kind of name is that? Alfalfa is a sprout. His cowlick is representative of this. So why would they use that symbolism? Well, Alfalfa's, or Carl Switzer's very next role in Hollywood was a lesser-known movie that came out the same year as Kitty Cure. Now here's where it gets interesting. This movie is definitely a spin-off from the Our Gang series, meaning Alfalfa is still called Alfalfa in this movie and he has the same cowlick. It's about to get pretty deep, so let's talk about it. The movie in concern is called Barnyard Follies. Remember, I was talking about these folly shows earlier? Well, literally, this movie is about an orphanage. One of the first shots show that this is the Farmdale Orphanage, and we have a bunch of orphans working on a farm, which is exactly what the early episodes of Our Gang show. So, this movie, which is not very well known, shows us more light on this whole situation. Well, like I said, this is a Little Rascals or Our Gang spinoff. Even Pete the dog with the black circle around the eye is in this movie, so how do you explain that? It'll be too much to break down this movie in its entirety, so I'll just mention some notes real quick. First off, the movie starts with them singing. There are these girls singing like chickens, which is super weird. Then they have this voting system for these orphans. But basically, this is another radio show contest sort of thing. Not really, but it's similar. radio is looking for the creator of a popular song. And this creator is a long lost brother who is entitled to a very large $20,000 estate. Well, this song is the song that the orphans were just singing. So the orphans are like, oh, they're talking about Pappy. Which, interestingly, this radio program is suspect to me too, as if it was made just for orphans. It's called the Inheritance Program. I don't know, that's just the vibe I got from it. Bubbles, which seems to be the main character played by Mary Lee, knows who they're talking about because the song sounded familiar to all the orphans. Next scene, the directors of the institution are trying to ask this Pappy Cheshire character, which is the long lost brother according to Bubbles, and these directors are asking for some money. But Cheshire is busy helping a kid's leg. Hiram Crabtree is one of these directors of the orphanage. Possibly a Hiram Abiff reference? But also, Miss Crabtree is one of the famous teachers from the Little Rascals series, so I'm not sure what that's all about. Pappy Cheshire is actually Zebediah Cheshire. Basically, they need money from Cheshire, which is the pappy of the orphanage. All the kids love him and he cares for them. He gave his money to the orphans as a loan so that they could start making their own business and being self sufficient. He wanted to help them get a better life. But the directors don't see the orphans as people. They literally can only think of money. And they're like, no, we hate this idea. Cheshire says that they shouldn't think of them as something you just feed and provide shelter for and then get rid of once they get old enough. Pappy wants to treat them as if they were his own, but the directors do not want this and hate the idea so much that they would fire Pappy, who apparently has been taking care of these orphans for a long time at this institution. Well, the song that the brother made was called Barnyard Follies, which was what they were singing at the beginning, and he calls into the radio to get his money, but the directors hear how much he's going to win and start scheming behind his back. So this is kind of weird. They show up to get this estate, and it's actually called the Peep Inn, which is a nightclub for adults. Pappy and Bubbles come to visit this place, and Pappy's peeking through a tiny hole watching women dancing. Bubbles is like, can you see? And Pappy's like, yeah, I can see, chuckling, and makes this weird reference to chickens, that he didn't know what kind of chicken they'd be. I think he's making an orphan reference here, where he says the chicks from the farm grow up to be these fine chickens. Basically a reference to these adult dancers. Pappy plans to close the club, so he approaches the Peep Inn's group of performers and the director, Jeff Hill, to settle their contracts for their release. The entertainers refuse the offer, and Pappy insists that they come to Farmdale to work for him for the remainder of their contract. What ends up happening is that Pappy doesn't get as much money as he thought, so he can't pay the directors or the performers. So what do? Well, the orphans put on a stage show called Barnyard Follies. So again, a bunch of orphans putting on a show for money. I won't go much more in detail, but there is this weird part where one of the directors of the orphanage is trying to adopt a child to gain the favor of Pappy Cheshire. This is just so creepy to me, like an old rich lady coming in with these fancy clothes and wanting the orphans to impress her so that she'll pick one. Well, she starts with Alfalfa, and Alfalfa says, look, you don't want me, lady. I'm the problem child. She attempts to trick the children into liking her so that she can adopt them, and she does this throughout the movie, which is just bizarre because it's like they don't even care. This rich lady isn't going to take care of these kids. And sure, the majority of the kids don't want to go with her. But still, it's just the concept of some rich folks coming in and adopting a child willy-nilly that kind of reveals how things really went. You weren't always adopted by a loving family. Which is even weirder when you get to the scene where they all sleep in the same room and Bubbles is singing this strange Lollipop Land song. Some weird candy paradise thing to give the illusion that the orphanage is such a lovely place. So yeah, very weird movie. Alfalfa even sings in his off-pitch style. The dog goes into a box with cross skulls, and the teen orphans later in the movie end up performing the Barnyard Follies just like the nightclub, which makes the reference from the Peep Inn much more apparent when he was comparing the ladies to chicks. To me, many of these skirts are way too short. I don't care what era it is, it just seems bizarre to me, and the Little Rascals also did this in several episodes as well. There's also this one performance in the movie about popping corn. It's this weird song, but we see a cauldron, and corn is spelled with a K. They don't seem to be singing about normal corn. Why a cauldron? And what's up with those weird cows in the background? The movie basically ends where we discover the directors did not care about the orphans at all and they were making money off them. That's why they didn't want them to be self sufficient. These orphans were just another business for them. So, why are we talking about this movie? Because I'm saying this is the same world from the Little Rascals. This is what happens to Alfalfa after the Kitty Cure episode. He gets returned and becomes an orphan again. That's the theory, anyways, as why wouldn't we get any explanation on what happens to Alfalfa? And the dog is in this movie too, which is the symbol of an orphan who is in the club, which they even have a 4 H club in this movie too. Okay, well, let's finish discussing Alfalfa. So we know in real life he was a Mason. In a spin off movie of The Little Rascals, we find out Alfalfa is an orphan. And there's something else that is super interesting about all this. Well, one of the reasons I began researching the show is because a commenter told us of a very intriguing episode. Apparently, there is an episode of The Little Rascals that feature a cabbage dealer. From what this comment details, the kids run into a salesman with a top hat and a turnip cart. He's selling babies with cabbage leaves around their neck, and as Alfalfa and the crew see this, they make a plan to free the babies. Honestly, the description sounds like a Little Rascal episode, and not sure how you would mistake such details like that, including Alfalfa, such an iconic character. So I don't think this commenter just made this up or is misremembering. I do think there is an episode or movie that has the scene of babies being sold in a cart. That's not something you forget easily. But the issue is, I've watched every Alfalfa episode and every talkie. There is no episode that has this scene. I started thinking that maybe it was from the silent era, but how would you misremember Alfalfa? So perhaps this could be a movie that Alfalfa was in outside of the Little Rascals. It also very well could be a piece of lost media. Maybe it was broadcasted at some point and it was an episode that existed before the MGM Vault fire, which that's a whole nother rabbit hole. We can talk about that in a bit, but I'd really like to see if you guys are willing to help find this episode or whatever this scene may be. It would be pretty insane to find such a reference. I've extensively looked through archives, the Our Gang wiki, and there's nothing that describes the scenario. However, there is something that I found that may serve as a clue. Well, apparently, Alfalfa, or Carl Switzer, was in a 1942 movie, 2 years after Kitty Cure in Barnyard Follies, called Miss Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch. I'm starting to think that this is another piece of lost media, as I've looked everywhere for a copy of the 1942 Miss Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch, and it doesn't seem to exist online. I mean, nothing. No VHS, no DVD, no online streaming. There's no way for me to watch it, so if you happen to have access to the 1942 version, please let us know. But what we do know is that Miss Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch is a 1901 novel by Alice Hegan Rice, which on the surface is about a southern family who humorously are coping with poverty. It was extremely popular during its time and was adapted to film several times, so obviously this is an important book. It was actually even a Broadway show in 1904. Apparently, Rice was inspired to write the book during her philanthropic work in Louisville, Kentucky, a slum area where she met an optimistic and cheerful woman who was a model for the book's main character. So, wait, this is based on a true story to a certain degree? What is it about? Well, in the 1901 novel, there isn't really anything on orphans. It doesn't say anything about adoption, but we do get a description of what a cabbage patch is. Quote, the Wiggses lived in the Cabbage Patch. It was not a real cabbage patch, but a queer neighborhood where ramshackle cottages played hopscotch over the railroad tracks. There were no streets, so when a new house was built, the owner faced it in any way his fancy prompted. End quote. Interestingly, Miss Wiggs takes care of these children on her own, and even the oldest is like the man of the house. This seems like a weird scenario to me. Even in the movie, Miss Wiggs is pretty old. And this also connects with the old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children she didn't know what to do. Which, interestingly, Hal Roach has another movie that's pretty good called Babes in Toyland, which is like this early fantasy movie. But I just thought it was weird that Laurel and Hardy play these orphans who live in the shoe with this old woman and they work in a factory. There's also this super creepy Mickey Mouse in this movie. I don't know, random tangent, but to me, that's what the Cabbage Patch is when you break it down. It's a poor neighborhood where orphans or parentless children live for a while, just like Dorothy from Wizard of Oz. And also notice how the Cabbage Patch is on the railroad tracks. So orphan trains go through there, perhaps? If you were to just read the novel, some may think that's reaching. Well, let's look at some of the films that are online. Strangely, they're all very different. Some of them have completely different beginnings on how they end up at the Cabbage Patch, which leads me to believe there may be some more source material. But, anyways, I couldn't find the 1914 silent film. There is a description and a few pictures, but this one seems to have strayed away from the novel or something because it goes into this whole circus story. The 1919 film is online, and this is where we start to see the connection between orphans and cabbage patches. The plot revolves around an orphanage that is about to give up a boy for adoption, but one of the older orphan girls does not want to leave this little boy because she loves him, and so she takes the little orphan boy and they escape. They meet a guy that's on his way to see his aunt at the cabbage patch, and so he's like, I'm gonna take you back to the orphanage, but first he's gotta go to the cabbage patch. So once he gets out of the car, the orphans run off and end up finding their way to Miss Wig's house. Well, the cops are looking for these orphans, and the older son is like, please, Ma, can we keep them? And so Miss Wiggs hides the orphans in her home and lies to the police. So she does take in orphans. So yeah, the main character from the 1919 movie is an orphan that comes to help bring growth to the Cabbage Patch. To me, seems super weird. And this is with Margaret Clark, who also played Snow White from 1916. There's also the 1934 film, which is also on YouTube, which is not about orphans, but Miss Wiggs is about to get evicted. To me, the weird part is that I'm pretty sure the girl Tabitha orders a husband, like, picks him out of a catalog or something. And I get it, like, things were different back then, but this whole thing doesn't seem right. The guy shows up to the door and they have no relationship or anything. He's just like, oh, can you cook? But she can't cook, so she has to lie to be able to get this husband. To me, it seems like this is programming or something. To her, it's an accomplishment to get a husband. She'll become wealthy, supported. But does she understand what love is? I don't think so. So, yeah, that's the basic gist of the movies, but I can't find the alfalfa version from 1942. There aren't even any pictures. I found a few on eBay of the actors together, but I couldn't find any screens from the movie, which is bizarre considering they have shots for the 1914 silent film. There's also hardly any information on it on the wiki. Only thing of value is this one review on IMDb, talking about how rare it is, and in this review he basically says that alfalfa is one of the children in Miss Wig's home. That they seem to be children who just happen to be around, or perhaps street kids that Miss Wiggs takes care of. So, yeah, another bit of lost media. We see there is a connection between orphans and cabbage patches. Even alfalfa from the Little Rascals is connected to the cabbage patch. Well, let's come back to the episodes. Now, one of the things I need to mention is that there are a lot of lost episodes. Episodes have been edited, and we must also consider that perhaps some were destroyed on purpose. When it comes to such a vast series that goes back to the early 1920s, we're talking possibly up to hundreds of hours of film if we include the silent and lost films. Simply keeping these films costed money. So you have to think, there has to be shots, maybe even entire episodes that never made it to the modern day. One of the big reasons for this was the 1965 MGM Vault Fire, which is said to have started from an electrical short that ignited the stored nitrate film. Apparently, this fire also killed at least one person. Hundreds of films were destroyed, including many older Our Gang shorts. What I find interesting is that some of these episodes have descriptions and seem to be very interesting episodes. Perhaps there are cases where episodes were deliberately destroyed because their symbolism or message was too blatant. One of these episodes that I found interesting was Heebie Jeebies, which is an older episode from 1927 that contains a hypnotist. The children are hypnotized to become animals. Farina makes up as a black cat that licks up the real kitten's milk and ruffles his back in comic indignation. The monkey takes some daring swings on the chandeliers, while the little fat doggy bites all of the society ladies on the hands and other unmentionable locations. A clean, clever farce which will intrigue the children. That sounds like a really weird episode. We can never view it because it was lost in the 1965 vault fire. Seems convenient if you ask me. There's also the Yale vs. Harvard Lost episode, which I'm sure would have some type of club references in it. Fair and Muddy is another lost episode from 1928, and interestingly, the description says the gang live at the Gramercy Orphanage operated by Grandpa and Grandma Evans. Next door to the orphanage lives Amanda Schultz, a child hating spinster who has a drawer filled with confiscated baseballs that she has taken from the kids. However, Amanda starts acting nice towards the gang after she receives a telegram stating that she must acquire a child of her own in order to inherit a bequest from a rich uncle. Grandpa Evans is suspicious of Amanda's actions and tells the kids to make life miserable for her. The gang sticks Amanda with pins, attack her chauffeur with a pea shooter, and set her friend ablaze. Then a rival gang arrives and a mud battle ensues. Amanda joins the mud bath and ends up winning it for the gang. This experience softens her as she realizes the gang made her feel like a child again. This lost episode is the original second childhood episode with Alfalfa where they make the older lady act like a kid again. So Second Childhood is a remake talkie of this lost silent episode. But the real question is, why did they remove the orphanage part? Crazy House is a 1928 lost episode where the gang are invited to lunch at Jean's house, which has been rewired for an April Fool's party. Then we have the Holy Terror from 1929, which featured a gorilla suit. The plot revolved around Mary Ann becoming a serious problem to other gang members, and so Joe Cobb is given the job of training and controlling her behavior, whatever that means. So I don't know, I found that very interesting that some of these lost episodes are quite bizarre, and it's possible that perhaps they contain things that someone didn't want us to see. To me, that's something that's rarely considered when it comes to lost media. For some reason, no one's willing to ask that question, but to me, it's completely plausible. Okay, but before we talk about Spanky's episodes, let's finish off with some of the newer episodes after Alfalfa because they kept going after he left. For example, Fightin' Fools, where they're literally doing some type of fake war. It's kind of like the Civil War, and they're all wearing hats just to give this impression that the wars are staged. Here's an interesting episode, Baby Blues, where somehow the crew ends up thinking that every fourth child is Chinese, and so Mickey's freaking out because he doesn't want an Asian brother. But then Spanky introduces them to Li Wong, which is a Chinese friend that we've never met. It's actually kind of sweet. They go and get a nice dinner and realize, you know what, it won't be so bad to have a Chinese brother. There's another reference to the All for One Club in the Ye Olde Minstrels episode. Seems kind of weird with the pyramid stage, and there's a mention of the burning of Rome. Oh, and this episode has another blackface scene. Weirdly, there's an episode with an AI robot. I thought that was kind of weird. In Helping Hands, Spanky starts an army and they have an infantry reserve. Infant? Come Back Miss Pips has the same orphanage older guy who is really mean, but this time he takes away their favorite teacher. In Melodies Old and New, there is a Choo Choo song, which will become relevant in a moment, and they are the bums of Greenpoint football. So they are bums. Going to the Press makes a reference to the Gas House Gang, which is another subject connected to Alfalfa as he's in the movie Gas House Kids from 1946, and it's about a group of unruly New York children from the Gas House District. This one's super weird because they print the newspapers with their butt, and the goat ends up eating the newspaper, but the final text says, "The goat is mightier than the pen," which seems to be a strange, subtle reference. So the secret society is mightier than the truth of what happened?